action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try.
Hello and welcome to Call to Action, the go-to podcast for anyone trying to make sense of the world of marketing, advertising and beyond. In an industry that is a minefield of utter bollocks, we aim to capture our heroes and allies from the front line to have a chinwag with. It's like Pokemon Go, with the single but vital exception that it's not a short-term bandwagon of shite. It's brought to you by Gasp, and I'm Giles Edwards. Today I've caught Stefana Bosse and Jennifer Tessler. Pals since puberty and prone to bickering like an old married couple, Stefana and Jennifer have always found a sense of purpose in creating stuff together. Their own personal experiences with psychedelics and inner work inspired them to found Alalaho, a series of psilocybin-assisted retreats offering a safe, legal environment for a psychedelic journey. When describing the business, they say peak states, such as those experienced on psychedelics, can open us to what is important in life, but they aren't enough to cause lasting change. To deepen the insights gained during a peak state into a new way of life, we must address what is blocking us from experiencing our full freedom, wholeness, and potential. Welcome to the show, Stefana and Jen.
Thank you, Giles. So happy to be here.
I'm really happy to meet you.
Thank you. Right, we've got our 7 quickfire questions. So we're going to come to Stefana first and then Jen. So, tea or coffee?
Tea. Clear one. No caffeine for me. Herbal tea, please.
Tea, a nice cup of puer in the mornings.
Mushrooms or truffles?
Ooh, mushrooms. If possible, I mean, legally, just in the Netherlands, we can just do truffles. So happy with them too. But mushrooms, they're just a bit prettier and tastier.
Okay.
Mushrooms, but mostly meditation for me.
Perfect. Number 3, open or deepen?
Ooh, same, but different. It's like two sides of the same coin.
Okay, good answer.
Open or deepen? Oh, that's a good answer, Steph. Open or deepen? Yeah, both, definitely.
Okay, this one might be more problematic. Berlin or Amsterdam?
Ooh, I mean, for me it's easy. I live in Berlin, so I've made my choice right there. But I do think Amsterdam is prettier. So Berlin to live, Amsterdam to visit.
I live in south of France and I live in the countryside, so it's hard for me to pick any city. Berlin, just to see Steph.
The add-on to that would be neither the countryside. That is definitely the best one.
Yeah, okay. So, Stefana, you chose both, and Jen, you chose neither. Perfect. Sing or dance?
Oh, this is impossible. I'd say no, both. It's gotta be both. I'm much better at dancing. Dancing is my natural kind of habitat. But my soul really wants to sing as well. And I think you can't. It's no. You gotta have both. I'm sorry, you can't.
Okay. Jen?
I agree. It's a bit like the open or deepen. It's like it can't really be you can't choose. I can't choose.
Oh, okay. Well, you're not allowed any more passes. Right, we've only got 2 more. Magic or mystery?
I mean, I know we're not allowed any more passes, but it's like you're asking us. It's like great. No, I don't know if Great Britain or UK is. That's not a good question, but the comparison. But it's like the same thing. You know, you can't choose between two things that are the same thing. But magic or mystery. Mystery maybe is vaster and contains magic, so I'll go with mystery if I must.
You must. Thank you, Jen.
Yeah, mystery. It kind of stays a bit more open.
Okay, good. Right, last one. We've got psychedelic songs. So, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds or White Rabbit?
Oh my god, this feels like a blast from the past to even.
Yeah.
I mean, on some level, I think, like, I want to go Beatles, but with those particular songs on some level, like White Rabbit, it's just but because of the essence, I mean, I'm a psychedelic gal, so I'm gonna choose Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds.
Ah, that's an easy pick for me, the Beatles, anytime.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay, brilliant.
Oh yes, yes, yes.
Amazing.
My
Well, we
my
left the easiest one to the end, it seems.
yeah, it's good. My teenage bedroom was covered with posters of the Beatles.
Ah, wow. Who was your favourite Beatle?
John Lennon,
Nice. Good shout.
unoriginally.
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. So listen, I think everyone needs a break after that. That was a lot more stressful than I had anticipated. So to start the show, we like to celebrate the long and winding paths that guests seem to take in their careers. Could you share with our audience what were your first ever jobs? And then what was your first job that involved psychedelics? Because that's the bit that I think is really interesting.
So my first ever real job, if you want to call it, was as an assistant campaigner in an NGO called Global Witness, which is a sort of human rights NGO involved in political activism, a corruption watchdog. So very much in the kind of outward focused on how do we make the world a better place, how do we create change, and that was the beginning of my journey, very much politics, economics, human rights. And my first psychedelic job was exactly what my job is still now. 7 years later, it's I was asked kind of out of the blue, never planned to do this, never expected to do this. I was asked if I want to set up and start running these retreats, and when I was asked, I had the strongest gut response and heard myself say yes, even before I could think about it. My head started to go, "What? Are you crazy? What are you doing? You're not qualified to do this. What's your dad gonna think?" Da, 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 da.
And what, what did your dad think?
Oh, he was not impressed for a good number of years. Yeah, it was probably the most difficult period in our relationship because he always told me to do whatever I wanted to do and just support me all the way. And then when I decided I wanted to be a psychedelic facilitator, that sort of broke down. But no, eventually, like with more studies coming out, I think it was when the Financial Times reported on our retreats, and when Michael Pollan's book came out, that was sort of what won him over, when he had colleagues from his office say to him like, "Oh, I read about your daughter in the Financial Times." I think that's when he started to realize I'm not just completely going off the rails, like something is actually shifting. So yeah, now he's in support.
Perfect. Well, I'm pleased to hear that. And Jen, what about you? What's your background then? So did you have a similar kind of activist start to life? Because you two have known each other a long time, as I mentioned in the intro.
Yeah, I mean, we've been friends for 16 years, and we were close from the beginning, but we've definitely grown even closer with time. We've had very similar interests and passions, and the similarities in our trajectories, but somehow also with their own flavors and angles. So yeah, I've not. I wasn't formally involved in activism. I was when I was at uni through student societies, these kind of things. But in terms of first job, I mean, to be honest, my first real job is this one. I went to uni quite late. I took about 2 or 3 gap years and traveled around. It took me a while to find my path. And my first job after uni, I joined. Steph and I had organized a TEDx event called TEDx Whitechapel, and we invited this guy, I forgot his name now, Richard something, from Mindfulness in Schools project to give a talk. And so when I finished uni, I joined the team. I was just doing a bit of admin support as part of that project. It's basically bringing mindfulness meditation to kids in schools. My intention was very much to have the lightest possible job so that I would have all the freedom that I needed to go and attend my Buddhist retreats. So that worked well for a while. And then I joined yes, the Psychedelic Society experience retreats with Steph, and now becoming Alalaho.
It took some convincing to get her to join, but eventually she did.
So Jen, what would you say? And forgive me, I think I might have pronounced it wrong in the intro, but Alalaho. So how would you sum up what that is in a nutshell to our listeners?
Ooh, Alalaho in a nutshell. Alalaho is an invitation, I suppose, for people to get in touch with the infinite richness that lies within. And yeah, that's about it. That's a nutshell.
Is that articulation, does that explain what inner work is, Stefana? Or is that not quite?
Yes, it's like the sort of maybe the top line, the heading, and then of course you can break it down, because maybe there be a lot of people listening thinking like that sounds nice, getting in touch with the richness, the infinite richness inside of us. But yeah, like inner work involves, in some way I would say inner work is what it takes to access that. So actually we have so many things that blocking us, that from growing up, developing our personalities, our strategies to cope with the world, that we then get a bit stuck in our habitual patterns and tendencies and limiting beliefs. So inner work involves opening the box of actually why are we the way we are, and what of that serves us, and where could we actually maybe stretch a little beyond, or what can we maybe let go of, what doesn't serve us anymore, and what do we call, yeah, it's really like opening the box and taking all the steps into that vast dimension of an infinite dimension of our inner world.
Yeah. And is that something that is always beneficial and important for us to do inner work? Is it something that you don't think necessarily we are afforded the time or even the context to actually do inner work in our normal day-to-day lives?
Yeah, I mean, I think I personally, obviously this is what I do, this is what we offer in our work, so I believe wholeheartedly in the benefit of embarking on the inner path. And I think that a lot of the suffering that we see externally is manifestation is of what is going on inside ourselves. And we we live, many of us live in maybe in jobs and relationships and the way that we're relating to life, the earth, that's actually not super fulfilled, not super alive, not super connected. I think there's a yearning in many people for more meaning, for this kind of knowing that actually life can be more than this. So for that, both for the sort of the beauty and the potential that actually this life has to offer, as well as for attending to the suffering that we have in our own lives and that's playing out globally, it's immensely beneficial. It's like both the cleaning up and the expanding. In inner work, and inner work, we can break it down. I mean, there's so many aspects of what is inner work, but yeah, that's really those are really the tools to start addressing those aspects.
Yeah, no, I think the more I've researched your backgrounds and the more we've looked into the agenda for recording today, the more it seems to make sense to be something that is relevant to so many more people than they probably would assume when they hear, say, psychedelic retreats, for example, simply because it's that search for meaning, which I think is probably relevant to every single person on this earth, regardless of what country you live in and what kind of socio-economic background you're from, etc., etc. And I imagine that anything that facilitates that can be and should be hugely beneficial to society.
Can I chip in with just a little, like a quick point on this? It was just making me think as you were asking the question, and Steph, as you were answering, yeah, reminded me of an image that I came across in a book just the other day, about kind of transformation, like inner transformation. And you're asking about the importance or the relevance of attending retreats, kind of going away to do inner work. And for me, there's a kind of twofold answer. It's like it's trying to change without going on retreat in a way is a little bit like trying to rebuild a train station without stopping the traffic. And so I think there is something to be said about the importance of, like just putting everyday life on hold and carving out a space that is dedicated to, yeah, just cultivating a particular type of awareness and engaging with other forces not everyday life forces. And at the same time, it's also really important to say that inner work doesn't stop. You don't do 7 days of inner work on a retreat and then you're back in everyday life. It's like every moment of life can become inner work, like even sitting at the computer or washing the dishes. That's where the idea of, I suppose, practice, kind of spiritual practices, meditation practices come into play. It's like we don't have to sit on a cushion or attend a retreat in order to attend to our inner world.
No, that makes complete sense. I like that, Jen. I like the idea also that it's a constant. It's not, it's not like a crash diet that someone might go on to become healthy and then they revert to their normal life. And your kind of metaphor there about stopping the traffic is and physically going on a retreat. Would you say that's partly the role of psychedelics in a work? Because in a way, that's stopping the rest of the traffic in your headspace when when you've removed yourself physically but mentally. Maybe is that what psychedelics are used for?
Yeah, I'd say psychedelics are probably one of the most powerful tools that we have to stop the traffic or change the traffic in a very immediate way. Of course, there are tools like meditation and psychotherapy where you go bit by bit, and psychedelics shake things up. And there's often the metaphor used of a sort of a snow globe, that you just really shake it up. Or when, I don't know if anyone listening has gone skiing, the big machines come at the end of the day and they just wipe all the snow clean again, and then you can form new pathways. It's a little bit similar. So there is a sense of, I mean, often, when I go on a psychedelic journey, it can be at least as much or even more restorative and nourishing as a holiday, because there's a deep spaciousness that comes from getting out of our usual kind of routines and patterns of thinking. So that is one aspect of it. And then there's a whole lot more, because of course also it can give you insights about your life. It can put you in touch with and give you access to feeling emotions that you've been suppressing, that have been blocked, that can get released and sort of cleansed through. And so it has a very cleansing aspect also, and kind of like wiping the lenses a little bit. So and this is also part of the reason why there's so much creativity that's associated with it, because suddenly you have all these new grooves. You're pulled out from your usual train tracks of thoughts. So there is that, and there's a whole, like, there's so many different layers of what psychedelics can teach you, show you, give you access to. That is just one big component. We could speak the rest of the podcast probably about all the many different things that I've learned on psychedelic journeys, and it always changes also, because it's not like taking a pill where you know exactly what the effect is going to be. It always works together with actually, where are you at, where is your psyche at the moment, what's the setting that you're in. So for me, over the years of doing psychedelic work, but also doing psychotherapy, also doing shamanic work, it's the places that I reach and the insights that I get, and how my psychedelic journeys are now is very different to 10 years ago. So that's also, it's not so easy to give a kind of clean cut answer to that question.
Yeah, no, I know, I appreciate that, and I'm asking you, I suppose, to paint an impossible picture, because I'm mindful that a lot of people listening to this might have no experience with psychedelics. So asking someone to explain what that's like to someone who doesn't have that as a reference point, I'm not even sure if that's necessarily possible. But obviously with your retreats, and this is something I'm interested to ask you about. So Stefana, I'll stick with you just because you've given that explanation. Is it beneficial, or is it as beneficial from an individual perspective as it is collectively? Because these are obviously retreats for groups of people. So I'm fascinated how it affects the collective group of people going on a psychedelic journey versus, say, an individual.
Okay. Yeah. So often people think that they they want to go, they would prefer to have a solo journey, a private journey, and maybe they only choose a group one because they can't afford a private guide or something like this. And actually, and I think we all at Alalaho are such strong advocates of the group experience and group work, because we are social beings, and actually so much of our pain and our struggles and wounding in life have to do with the issues we encounter in relating with people, beginning from when we're young with our parents, siblings, then our boss, employee, relationship, friends. We're very relational beings, so there's a lot of healing that actually happens that isn't only in the psychedelic journey, but that happens before, after, in the sharing circles, in the different exercises that we do. It's happened so many times that participants have come to us and been like, oh, I thought I was coming on a psychedelic retreat, I didn't realize I would get all of these other things, or saying that actually the sharing circles and the work we did on the integration day, the relating work, was at least as meaningful, if not more, to them, because there's something, we can feel so alone and isolated with our problems. And when we come together in a group and actually realize that these are very collective things that everyone's struggling with, and we see ourselves reflected in other people, it makes it easier to open to feel real connection, and it makes the load feel a little lighter. And that's one aspect. And there's also another aspect, which is that the psychedelic journey is not an accepted and integrated part of life in our society. So when you have such a big experience and you come back home into your family and friends and social circle, the chances are that many people might not quite understand what you've gone through. So the group at the retreat is your kind of primary community that knows exactly what you've been through, and that stays a resource. I mean, we have even a 9 month integration journey with that same group, so that you have that kind of ongoing support. And in many traditional sort of indigenous communities that have intact lineages of using these sort of substances, it was part and parcel of their culture. So you could just come back and you didn't need to integrate in the same way, because it's woven into the cosmology and the understanding how their societies function. But we don't have that here. So the group at the retreat is a super fundamental resource. So those are just two thoughts for why group work is really precious.
Yeah, but you know that makes so much sense, because you're right. I think even just with a very limited experience of kind of mental health and so many of my own experiences, it makes sense that anxiety is often born from a feeling of maybe not belonging as part of a group. There's always several people at play, or there's a community, or there's a group, or there's a tribe, or however you want to articulate it. So actually having this journey, for want of a better word, that you have with your psychedelic retreats makes complete sense, that actually there's huge benefits from doing it with other people versus just doing something privately. And do you find from your experiences, Jen, you mentioned that you're very well traveled, and I know you've had experiences all over the world, but do you think there are differences, geographically speaking, with the kind of crisis of meaning and this search for meaning that people have in societies? And Stefana mentioned then about that kind of integrating back into normal life and trying not to fall back into those patterns that you might be trying to disrupt.
Interesting question. And to be honest, what comes to mind, I mean, I have traveled quite a fair bit and lived in a few different places, but we do live in a very globalized world. And I don't know that the cultures, I've experienced in the few different places that I've lived in are so different, essentially, fundamentally. Well, yeah, some differences, but a lot of uniformity as well. And I guess what's coming to mind, as you're asking about, like, are there differences in this kind of crisis of meaning? And of course, it's in a way there's probably as many crises as there are individuals and as there are collectives. And yet at the same time, I also have this kind of, maybe it's a bit more of a psychological or anthropological lens, where Greek mythology still applies today in a way. And there's something, I think, that's just so fundamental to what it means to be human, to the way the psyche works. I guess I see something universal, and I see something a little bit timeless in what we're experiencing. And at the same time, of course, there are the specificities of our day and age. And I think that the scale of things is probably quite new because we're in such a global village. It's like, oh, suddenly the whole planet is concerned by this thing called global warming, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, there's no shortage of sources of anxiety for people to seek to understand and, I suppose, escape, for want of a better word. So how do you help people stop from slipping back into these, these learned patterns and behaviours?
And we don't stop people. Um, and actually, one of the things we talk about at the end of a retreat is that the kind of expansion and contraction is a natural part of life. And so just, the heart muscle opens and expands and contracts, and the ebb and flow of the tides. And so after a retreat experience, it will inevitably happen, most likely, that some contraction will happen again, that are the we've spent, depending how old you are when you come to retreat, but decades of living with our psychic structure and our learned patterns of behavior. So that for us, it's not so much like, if even in the mentality of like we must stop it, there's part of the part of what we try to unlearn. So how I would answer that is actually, in general, meeting the psychedelic journey and what comes up, and meeting all of ourselves with curiosity and with love. I mean, as cheesy as it sounds, my experience is that the only thing that really heals is love, and love has different expressions. Safety can be one of them. So whatever patterns that we have that don't serve us anymore, rather than just having this like, oh, I want to stop you, you're like not you're not me, actually getting more curious about, okay, what's underneath that, like why, what's the belief, what's the fear underneath it, what does it need. That's one approach, just that kind of curious inquiry and meeting it with curiosity and compassion, rather than anger or violence towards it. And and then there's also something, I guess we talk about also, like we have this dual approach of one that's a bit more this inquisitive, and then feminine and understanding and nurturing, loving. And then there's also the more kind of practice oriented, and also keeping and training the muscle that orients us towards where do we want to go and how do we want to be, and looking at it like, okay, these new patterns that we want to develop, these new behaviors, these new ways of being, they're essentially muscles that we haven't trained. So that's where the element of practice comes in, and we explore different practices. We invite our participants afterwards to really, it's about essentially like really saying yes to your life and embracing it, embracing the whole journey, and bringing in tools and practices that can help you every day more and more to remember, what is it that your heart most longs for, what are you really here for, and what do you need to do to help you, support you. And there's so many different tools and practices depending on who you are. Mine and Jennifer's practices have similarities and also are very different, because we're very different people. So it's about supporting people to find their own way. Stay with it.
Yeah, well, stay with it. I was about to say, you've mentioned, in fact, both of you, when you've talked about the retreats, you've talked about the longevity of it, and I found that you've both mentioned it's a, it's a process, or it's about change. It's not about just a one-off. And I think that, and in fact, when I was reading up on you both, you talked about, I suppose, using the journeys to cultivate happiness rather than relying on them as a quick fix, or a facility to numb yourself from a particular pain or something you might be suffering, and only to then return back to the normal patterns. So I think that idea that this happens on a timeline and is actually part of your life is quite significant. But do you think, Jen, there is a misunderstanding, and sadly something like psychedelics might just get put into the big pot that everyone thinks of is just they might put a label on called drugs and think that drugs are used by people to numb themselves and not as a tool to improve and cultivate that happiness.
Yeah, I mean, yes, definitely. Like we're still very much, there's, I guess there's still that heritage of the whole, like the war on drugs and how the whole research into psychedelics was shut down, following from the 60s, and all of that stuff is still very present. And of course, like all the research and publications and everything that's been released, into the medias the last few years is slowly changing that. And it's interesting, just the idea that, yeah, indeed, like a lot of drugs are about numbing, but in a way, like psychedelics are almost kind of how to say it just switches on your awareness to such a strong degree. It's really the absolute opposite of numbing. Yeah, I think there is something else that is problematic, and it kind of just also touches on what Steph was speaking to just before. But in a way, we're kind of the victims of a very black and white kind of linear mindset. And even just this word that's very popular now in the psychedelic scene of integration. And we were talking about that recently after an integration call that we held. It's like, what do we really mean by integration? It kind of almost gives this feeling of like there's a finish line and you have an experience and then you integrate it and that's it. And there's very often, and also because of how things are framed actually in some publications around psychedelics, like people have the idea and the hope, which is totally natural, that they have this peak experience and then they integrate it and then they just become that. It's like they want to stay in that state, in that most expensive state where all neuroses seem to dissolve somehow. But the truth is that that's not really how things go, and I don't actually believe that that's what integration means. I think for me there's something about just stretching, I'd say, like stretching the spectrum of possibilities. It's just like getting it in our system that yes, we can be our neurotic, wounded, contracted self, and we can also be all these other things. But we can't just, immutably abide in these kind of higher states. Like we're still dynamic beings and we're influenced by our environments and our moods and our tiredness and our physical body and all sorts of things. So yeah, I think it's really important to move beyond this kind of black and white, very kind of straight line, linear thinking.
Time, weather, and... We interrupt this podcast to announce that we will never interrupt this podcast with ads. Ads that awkwardly nudge you to contact the pod's host Giles at gasp.agency. Only last week, some pod listing companies did just that, calling for guidance on research and brand positioning. But we're definitely not asking you to do that. Anyway, back to the show.
No, I am your father.
Yeah, I had Yoda pinned for Luke's father. Anyway, hang on.
If
Ah,
I
there we
can
go.
jump into
That's
it,
better.
like, because you were asking about the quick fix and mentality independence. Yeah, I really think it's about changing how we like exactly what Jem was saying, changing how we relate to ourselves and how we relate to life, and that is part of what psychedelics do. It's not this idea of like, okay, there's something wrong with me and I need to fix it and I'm going to take this thing and then I'm done. It's more about actually cultivating a new attitude to life, and the current attitude that we have is very it's very convenience and consumption oriented. We just want it. We want to be able to buy it and we want it quick and we want it easy. And actually it's about embracing the journey. And when you do that, it can be it's like much more challenging in many ways, but also so much richer and vaster. And suddenly, like the game that we could be playing as humanity could be so much more exciting and beautiful and vaster than what we're doing right now. So it's like, yes, that it requires a sort of like willingness to show up for it, but the benefits are are very lush.
Yeah, well said. I really like you picking up the point on convenience and consumption, because they're they're at the core of that quick fix mentality. And I, you shouldn't need an article in the FT for validation. But I do think that goes a long way. And sadly, this really binary kind of way of thinking and that war on drugs has really done a real disservice to the types of work that you both do with people to cultivate happiness and to actually improve lives. I was having a conversation with someone recently about alcohol, and my own opinion, and I do have a very experience, or several experiences, quite a significant experience of drugs to relate to. But in my experience, alcohol has been far more damaging to many people I know than any particular drug. So there's a weird PR battle at play, sadly, which probably comes into effect in your worlds.
Yeah, and I think it's sorry, I think it's so sad because I feel like we operate when I think of alcohol, like we operate on a spectrum from like kind of nice to maybe nice to like potentially very damaging. It's like you can have like you can have a nice time with alcohol, and like Jen also enjoys a good chug of whiskey here and there. It's like we're not sort of
We've all heard about Jen.
Spiritual, like it's not like that. Like we also aren't really black and white, but yeah, when you just look at how in general I would say alcohol is being used, it ranges from being like something to just like help us through our like discomfort and inability to relax, and being a bit awkward, to just like help us have like a little bit of a better time because we're unable to find that ease and that joy in our being without it, to becoming potentially very damaging. And actually there are really so many other ways of being, and it's possible, and we can cultivate that. But it's almost like that awareness, the knowledge of that doesn't exist for most people. For most people, all the options to have a good time is to go out and have some drinks with some mates, and it's sometimes fun and often like not that satisfying. But actually it is possible, like it is possible to live in a much more fulfilling way. And that's also, it's not just psychedelics are becoming very popular now for like what you mentioned before, people who have like it's thinking of like people who really have mental health struggles, and they have immense potential for that. But actually this way of life that they open us up to has potential for all of us to live richer, more enjoyable, fulfilled lives.
Before I go on to our listener questions, which I'm about to head to, can you just give me an overview of the types of people that typically you work with on your retreats? Because I suspect they come from all walks of life and all different ages and backgrounds.
Oh, absolutely. It is, well, there's layers of diversity. In many ways, it is not as diverse as we would want it to be. And that says something about societies and all sorts of things. And it is also very diverse in terms of backgrounds, life experiences, countries, nationalities. It's we've had, I think, participants, the youngest must have been 19 or 20, and we've had, I think, the oldest was 78 or something like that. So we do get a really wide spectrum.
Yeah, I see. I was wondering whether there's a particular age of our lives where we seek meaning more than we do at other ages, but perhaps that's not the case.
Aside from the fact that I think we're collectively all quite lost in our society, and so everyone's seeking meaning. But it's also interesting that something else that we've lost a sense for in our culture is around rites of passage, and that there are different moments of transition, of meaning, and different periods of our lives. So thinking about somebody who's 19 and looking for direction in their life, to somebody who's at the end of their life and maybe asking themselves some big questions about this last chapter and the transition that comes afterwards. And also in the middle, I would say, even though the spectrum is very wide and we do tend to have quite young people and older people at almost all of our retreats, but the kind of biggest cohort of people is definitely between 30 and 50, or 60, like 30s, 40s, and 50s. And yeah, and I think we all individually at different times of our life reach moments when we kind of brush up against the skin, the snake skin that we inhabit, where life is sort of like edging us on to take the next developmental step, the next growth step, where it's like, oh, maybe actually like it's time for something else, something more. And that can be related to a big life transition, or yeah, it can just be something that's pulling you. It can just be a curiosity. Some people come and it's very clear to them that they really are in a big transition, and some people they don't really know what's happening yet, and it's just this quiet inner voice of curiosity that's pulling them somewhere, and that's at work kind of in the background. So it varies a lot, but I'd say the people are quite normal in kind of quotation marks, like they're really just like your average. They're not particularly spiritual, or we like a hippie,
Woodstock
or
hippies. Yeah.
not at all. But there is a sort of a basic openness and curiosity, and a little bit of a sense for adventure, that of course is what brings them even to come. But yeah, they're quite normal people.
Yeah, well, yeah, as normal as any of us are. Perfect. And Stefana, just quickly, do you typically discuss and try and, I suppose, heal pain that's related to their life inside or outside of, say, their working profession? Because I would suspect that it's really one and the same, and you're actually trying to, look and help someone from their very core. But presumably, a source of a lot of anxiety and pain in people's lives is their career, perhaps, or is their place of work, or it could be anything and everything. I suppose the only reason I'm asking that, sorry, just to give you a bit more clarity on that question, because it was a bit a bit woolly. What I meant was, is this something that lends itself to, say, business people who are, seeking some meaning in their life, or is that actually not really the right lens to look at this through, because you're actually talking about people as a, as a whole?
No, I think it is definitely very relevant also for business people, and both because business people are still people. They're humans with their own questions about life, etc. But also because I think we are in a very particular time where also how we do business and what it means to lead, and what kind of organizational structures are appropriate for our incredibly fast changing, complex time and environment that we're in. So also for that, from that perspective, I think the insights and kind of the openness, the flexibility, the different tools that you can, the inner tools and inner resources you can cultivate and get access to through this kind of work, and also that we actively teach, I think can be tremendously beneficial also to then take back into the work context. And it can also be, if somebody who maybe has some questions around, am I in the right career path and in the right role, or is there something else that's calling me, or am I kind of bringing my full potential here? So also for that, I mean, it depends. There's different kind of angles that you can come to it, but I do think that essentially on some level you can just talk about it. It's a way to access your own inner wisdom and to tap into wisdom, and that can be useful and can be applied to anything related to life.
Yeah, of course. Good answer. So we've got our listener questions now, which I'd like to move on to. So asking the general public for their opinion, be it on Brexit or boat names, is notoriously fraught with danger, but that's not stopped us asking. So as usual, we've selected two. And the first one I'll put to you, Jen, if I may. And the question is from Lucy. And Lucy says, I've heard that microdosing psychedelics can help unlock creativity. What's your view on using psychedelics for creativity purposes?
Oh, sure. Hi, Lucy in the sky with diamonds. Um, to be perfectly honest, like I don't actually have much personal experience of microdosing. I just tried it once for probably a couple of weeks, few weeks. So yeah, I don't have really a lot of personal experience to speak from. But that general question of using psychedelics for creativity, I mean, yes, definitely. I think creativity is, oh my God, like such a, a powerful force in life and in us. Um, it can be such a powerful force for healing, for transformation, for fulfillment, such a powerful way of tapping into wisdom, inner wisdom, guidance. So, I mean, yeah, I see creativity as being completely part of the deep journey that psychedelics can help us on.
And Stefana, the question 2 from Greg is: what's the most powerful experience you've had so far on one of your retreats?
Okay, good. I was not worried, but something else that's similar to worried, whether the question was going to be what's the most powerful experience I've had in my own psychedelic journey, because that would be quite some storytelling now. But no, on our retreats, wow, it's also a tough one because there've been so many beautiful stories. It's hard to pick one out. I remember one participant who he really struggled with, yeah, kind of relational contact with others, and with hugging and so forth, and in the very closing circle, his sharing was he demanded like a hug from everybody, and it's hard to just to make you realize like how powerful it was, but for somebody who just so struggled with physical contact and coming close, for him to stand there at the end, and he was sharing also about, he's like, when I go home, I'm gonna hug my son, and I'm gonna hug my wife, and I'm gonna hug my mom, and he was just, yeah, so that was really really meaningful. And I remember also a 62-year-old woman at one of the retreats who shared with me afterwards that she had never been hugged in her whole life the way that I hugged her during the ceremony, and that was just like, whoa, like somebody who's gone so far in their life. So there have been, yeah, stories, many stories like that. Obviously, I guess the things that stick out the most are these. I guess what I want to add onto that is that these are sort of more far out on a certain spectrum, people that maybe some listeners won't relate to, because it's like, well, they've been hugged, and but they stand out so much because there's such a huge jump. But there are other people that have come on the retreats and then just gone off, and you see them, and their whole, like, genuinely, like, their lives transform, and they just, like, it's really sort of ignited something, and then they just take it, and they go off, and they follow other pieces, and they go on this retreat, and they change things around, and that's been really, yeah, really meaningful.
Amazing. I have read all of the testimonials on your site, actually, and it doesn't surprise me what you've just said about that lady and the hug, because they are so glowing, and they're so glowing in recognizing the significance of the group as well as their own personal experience, which I thought was particularly telling and interesting. So the final part of our interview is our 4 pertinent poses that we put to all of our guests. Question 2 is actually less relevant, so I'm going to ask both of you question 1 to make up the numbers. So starting with you, Jen, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Yes, it's funny how hard it kind of is to think about that. But I guess the main thing is you can do something about it. I guess I felt when I was young very much the kind of passive victim of these immense forces of my own emotions. And for me, discovering, I guess, firstly meditation and psychedelics and just inner work is like, oh, I can actively cultivate well-being, happiness. I can cultivate qualities that will help me face hardships and navigate my emotions more skillfully, and not even just navigate them skillfully, but actually even grow a little wiser as a result. So yeah, you can do something about it.
Stefana, what about you? What advice would you give to a young Stefana?
Yeah, I love that question. My advice to young Stefana would be that to honor the truth of everything that one is feeling. That basically that you're not wrong for feeling anything that you're feeling. Like nothing about you is wrong, and to not abandon your truth for being afraid of rejection or feeling like you need to please anybody or that you're not gonna belong, etc. And that actually the thing that you're so afraid to show yourself with is what's going to create connection and what's going to create healing and the real medicine of truth, and just to keep cultivating your own love for the truth and to trust it, to move beyond the fear, to trust that sharing, finding out your own truth and standing by it and sharing it, a lot of healing and beauty and magic will come from that.
Are there any books that you would recommend to our listeners, Jen? And I'm dying to know what the first book you ever read on Buddhism was, by the way.
Funnily, the book I was going to recommend is the first book I ever read on Buddhism. So there's your two answers in one. It's called Awakening the Buddha Within. Bit of a cheesy title, but it was, absolutely transformative. There's one passage in particular I remember where he just gives these like very basic instructions on meditation, and I was 16 when I read the book. And there's something about just walking barefoot on the grass and feeling the sensations of the grass. And I remember being just absolutely mind blown by doing that. It was like, oh, I can be present. And yeah, that's just the beginning of a long journey.
Well, we will link to that book. Stefana, are there any books that you can recommend to our listeners?
Yes, so one of my favorite books is called The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible by Charles Eisenstein. Yeah, for me, Charles has an ability to penetrate through the issues of our time and of our own hang-ups of our own psyche, etc., just to such a depth. Like he's really pierced things, and it always opens my heart and is incredibly insightful, and I just write like yes, yes, yes in the comment, like in the margins when I write notes on it. And yeah, and that book is just a really a really beautiful book that also talks about a lot of the aspects where we can get hung up in sort of dogma and idealism, and it just goes that little bit further, and he's just a very wise man, and I highly recommend him.
Perfect, fantastic. And then the last poser is more of a request, really. We always dedicate every episode to someone, and we bestow that honour to our guest who has to give their reason why. So I mean, I will allow you one each if there's not a consensus here. But Stefana, would you dedicate this episode?
I was hoping you'd choose Jennifer's, because I just realized one question we actually didn't talk about before. I would dedicate it to two people that were very big teachers of mine, that founded something called the Path of Love, which is something that was really fundamental in teaching me what is now my advice to my younger self around really, being able to listen and honor and follow your truth. So their names are Rafia Morgan and Turia Hanover, and I did my therapy training with them as well. And yeah, I cannot recommend the Path of Love highly enough to anybody. And I also feel like giving a shout out to Rick Doblin, who is the founder of MAPS, the Multiplenary Association of Psychedelic Studies, because he's just a real incredible being, and we wouldn't be doing the work that we're doing if it wasn't for him. So those are two. Jen, who do you got?
I mean, for some reason, like I just really, I'm getting this wave of memories. Well, thinking about my grandmother, and she used to take me to. There's a big shop called La Fnac in France, where they have like infinite number of books, and she was a therapist. Um, and she used to take me there every Wednesday, and we'd buy a book and talk about therapy and philosophy and etymology. And yeah, she played a huge role in my early days of inner work. She's a wonderful grandmother. Moki, I love you.
Oh, brilliant.
I'm gonna be super sneaky and just get one more thing in. It's also cheesy, but I really do feel like that's the note that I would love to end on, is to dedicate it also to our participants and to actually every single person on this earth who has the courage to face themselves and heal the trauma that they can, and to show up to life in the fullest way that they can, and play their part and their contribution to this collective dance that we're dancing. So yeah, I want to dedicate it to all of them, and to all the others out there.
Amazing. Great dedications. Great. Thank you so much. So, as a final call to action, on this episode's listings, people will find links to Awakening the Buddha Within, The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible, to Alalaho. But how else can our listeners get more Stefana and Jen?
Yeah, I was gonna say I already don't fully remember everything you just you just said, but yeah, basically our website. I think signing up to our newsletter is nice, sometimes nice, or as nice as social media, because we share our thoughts every now and then. It's like our Alalaho ala love letter, and sporadic ala love letter, and yeah, of course, social media, the usual. But the best thing would be, if it speaks to you, to actually come on a retreat and meet us there.
Amazing. Well, Jen, Stefana, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure to talk.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you for the questions and the conversation.
Thank you. And finally, thank you to everyone listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do share and review the pod. Keep your questions and guest requests coming in. To get in touch, it's easy to find Gasp online. You can check out CTA Pod on Instagram, or just email hello@calltoaction.co.
I can't get no call to action. I can't get no call to action, but I try and I try and I try and I try. I can't get no call to action. Oh, I can't get no call to action. Yeah.